Welcome, everybody, to episode 29 of UnHacked. And as I mentioned before, UnHacked is a deliberate misnomer because, and we're going to talk about this more later on today, but the truth is 97% of breaches could have been prevented with basic security measures. But once you've been hit, again, today's episode is really going to illustrate this. You're kind of screwed. You cannot get unhacked. So, week after week, we sit here and we break down all the recommendations, the tools, the processes of how to protect your businesses. But really, we're trying to help overwhelmed business owners outsmart Russian hackers. That is what we're here for. We're going to talk about the basics, the best practices, the 97%. And then we'll wrap it all up with how we close that 3% gap. So let's get started. I am Justin Shelley, CEO of Phoenix IT Advisors. I work with businesses in the Dallas Metro, Northern Nevada, Utah, Idaho, just, trying to take over the world one state at a time, I guess. Pinky in the brain style. I'm not a nerd. And then I am here with my good friends and co-hosts, Mario and Bryan. Bryan, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
Excellent. Bryan Lachapelle with B4 Networks. We're based out of Niagara, Ontario. We supply services for small, medium businesses throughout all of Southern Ontario. So primarily out of the Niagara region, but also have an office in the Barrie area as well.
Now, Bryan, do you have a specific target audience, like a type of industry that you service, or is it just kind of all of them?
We do support most businesses, but we have a couple interesting niches. We supply a lot of agricultural and greenhouses, as well as long-term care and not-for-profits.
Okay. Mario, you are next up. What do you do? Who do you do it for, and where do you do it?
So my name is Mario Zaki with Mastech IT. We service the New York, New Jersey area. And we mostly concentrate on, construction, engineer, architects, and whoever else is in our area that has computers.
Okay. All right. Today, guys, this is going to be an interesting one. And it was kind of on accident. A couple episodes ago, we interviewed Joe Brunsman. I hope I'm saying his name right. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Great guy, great episode. The guy's just full of information, and I actually scheduled a follow-up call with him for my own company, insurance, do a little rehashing of what we use. And in that interview, when we started the meeting, he was kind of muttering to himself about comments on the most recent video he'd posted. So I stole that shit. I mean, this is what I do. Like, I find good information. And he was talking about a $5 million lawsuit that is in play right now for a small business who did not pay the ransom. They were being sued largely because they didn't pay a ransom. So that really caught my attention.
Crazy is that, right?
I think that's nuts.
How do you get sued for not paying the ransom?
I don't know, because you can get in trouble for paying it if it's somebody on the do not pay list, right? What do they call that?
Terrorism watch list or something.
Yeah. So, it's not good. It's not good. So we just want to never get there. Anyways, we're going to talk about that lawsuit. We're going to talk about the tip of the week is going to be how to spot a phishing email. And I think that this is one that gets talked about a lot. So we'll rehash it, and then we'll kind of make a final point on what we really need to do there. And then, as always, we're going to wrap it up with our formula on how to protect our businesses from the likes of Boris Grishenko, my arch nemesis. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into this video. And again, I want to give full credit to Joe. Because I kind of watched the video and I took notes, and some of this stuff I just ripped off directly. And I will check with him before he published this to make sure he doesn't have a problem with that. But Bryan, you said you've also seen this video, and I just kind of want to throw it out to you. What did you see? What was your kind of key takeaway in a nutshell?
Well, my key takeaway was the fact that they're partially being sued. There's a little more to the story, but they're partially being sued for not paying the ransom. There's obviously a little bit more involved in that. But ultimately, I'm not sure if I should go with the biggest takeaway, but my biggest takeaways were have systems and processes in place, do something, because part of this lawsuit is also just them not doing much. The company who's being sued wasn't doing much.
Allegedly.
Right, allegedly. So allegedly knew they were supposed to do things and opted not to. And so and like Joe was saying, if you're listening to this podcast or you've listened to any podcast like it or watched any videos or even had any kind of like news in your face, and there's a trail that you have done that, you're supposed to take care of cybersecurity, and if you don't, then they can come after you as well, like lawsuit wise, if you get breached.
Claiming ignorance is not a strategy is basically what you're saying there.
That was the takeaway for me: is don't claim ignorance, because that's not going to work.
Why are they getting sued for not paying the ransomware instead of being sued for not doing what they're supposed to? It's a combination of all.
So let's jump in. Yeah, great question. And that's the headline, that's the clickbait. But it's a key key part of it. But obviously, there's a lot to this. So we're talking a $5 million lawsuit. This isn't pennies. And, interestingly enough, this is not a huge company. They do 11 million in revenue. So average insurance policy for a company of this size isn't 5 million. That was another thing that he mentioned.
Between 1 and 2.
Yeah, they're getting sued above and beyond what their insurance policy will cover. And Joe, in our conversation this morning, said it's not fun to fund these out of your savings account. So basically, they were hit by the bad actors, the bad guys called Black Suit. Are you guys familiar with them?
I've never heard of them till today. Yeah.
And the allegations are, and this is not a complete list because it was a long list, but basically that the company failed to protect PII, and that the data breach was preventable, which is what we talk about week after week. This stuff is preventable. So hard to argue with that. We've mentioned before, I've said that I have prospects look me in the eye and say, I don't have anything worth stealing. They're not going to come after me. The bad guys, why would they? I don't have anything. We all do. If we're doing business, we have information about our clients. And the bottom line is, if we don't protect that information, we are on the hook.
Right.
And then the cyber criminals, I think they either said they were going to, they threatened to, or they have put this information on the dark web. It's now up there for sale, which, is long-term damage to the clients. But here's where the headline comes from. The company failed to provide any assurance that it paid a ransom to prevent plaintiffs and the class's data from being released on the dark web. So they are complaining that they're saying they should have paid it to keep this information.
Well, it was a combination of a couple of things. What they were saying is, because you didn't take the precautions that you ought to have, because you didn't do your due diligence like you ought to have, when they came to you with a ransom, you should have paid the ransom. And by not paying the ransom, again, you allegedly didn't take any precautions and didn't take any responsibility for the actions of that those precautions would have taken or would have prevented if you had done them. And so now you're liable for all the damages that came.
Right. If you're going to screw it up, allegedly, if you're going to screw it up on the front end, you better, protect your clients on the back end.
Right. Yeah. So that essentially is the nutshell of the lawsuit. Yeah. You didn't do anything before and you didn't do anything after. So
and they're wondering why they're getting sued.
Right. Yeah. Pay me before or pay me after, or pay before, not me, because I'm not the criminal, but pay before or pay after. One way or the other, you're paying, is what the message is here.
So there was quite a lengthy list of what this lawsuit says should have happened as preventive measures, and I went through it line by line, and I didn't see anything in there that we don't talk about or that we don't do for our clients. So that was good. But here's just a couple of them. Follow the CISA guidance and cybersecurity advisories. That in itself is a lot. Like that's not a small task right there. Follow FTC reasonable safeguards. Again, you have to know all these things to follow them. Adhere to a cybersecurity framework such as NIST. I liked that one. Some industries are, by regulation, they have to have security measures in place. Right. But it wouldn't be a terrible idea to do this on our own. whether we're regulated into it or not. And that's not what they said specifically, but that is a conclusion I had come to a while back, where I'm actually going to start offering these frameworks, compliance to these frameworks for my clients as an add-on service. It's optional, but like, let's get ahead of this stuff. Case in point today, right? Follow recommendations from the Microsoft Threat Protection Intelligence Team. Follow FBI cybersecurity recommendations. I mean, it's a huge list. So it's do everything. That's kind of what the lawsuit says.
Now
So,
let me add one thing, because our listeners listening to this are like, holy shit, we're not going to do 20 different things. A lot of this stuff overlaps.
So absolutely.
So it's like two-factor authentications are going to be on every list.
Correct.
So you're checking it off. Having a good antivirus like an EDR, that's going to be on every list. Backup is going to be on every list.
Absolutely.
So,
it's all the things. Like, I like to bring it back to something that people can understand. And imagine you're hopping on a plane. You expect the pilot to go through a checklist of things that they're supposed to verify before taking off, right? To make sure that the plane doesn't just fall out of the sky, right? Well, unexpectedly.
Yeah.
If you don't do these things in your business, if you don't have these checks and balances, you don't put these cybersecurity protections, you're effectively flying a plane without having any checks and balances, without having verified anything, without having, make sure that all of the engine components are operating at optimal performance, and you're just asking for trouble, essentially, is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Well, to your point, Mario, they do overlap, and I think the point of it in listing everything, because it's basically, here are all the places where this information is stated, and we sit here week after week and we talk about industry standards, best practices. This is where they come from. Right. This isn't stuff we're just making up. We don't just sit around and say, hey, I wonder what we should do to protect ourselves. It's out there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, you should be including your IT person, whether it's internal, external, outsourced, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to know where to find the information for you to action. Nobody expects you to know where to find the information, but you should be consulting professionals who do, and that's the folks in the IT space.
Yeah. I mean, so we usually kind of break down the financial and emotional impact of a breach. This one, like I said, it's kind of a new twist. And if I'm just putting myself in the shoes of this company being sued, that emotionally is going to just kick me right in the ass, because, there's probably, allegedly, a lot of things that should have been done ahead of time. You get caught with your pants down, and now you're in trouble for still trying to do the right thing a little bit late, which is to not reward these thugs, because we do talk about that. And there's a list of people we can't pay, but B, we don't really want to pay them at all. We don't want to encourage them to stay in business. Right. And so in doing that, man, they just get raked over the coals. So let's throw this out as a question. Is it better to pay a ransom and encourage the bad behavior, or not pay the ransom? And when we're looking at this from the perspective of our clients, if let's just say, God forbid, one of us gets breached, which one is the most harm? Paying the ransom to avoid disclosures, or ongoing theft identity?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, because on an individual basis, if you haven't made the precautions you were supposed to, it might make sense for you as a company to survive to pay that ransom. The impact on the greater business community is that it's going to encourage and fund these criminals from continuing that action. They're going to continue it, and you might be supporting organizations that are doing much more darker things, human trafficking, and terrorism, by supporting these organizations by paying the ransom. So it's kind of a catch-22. In some cases, in order to survive, you might have to pay the ransom because you don't have either proper backups or the ability to get back up and running quickly. For example, if you're, a medical facility or something like that, where you have, critical patients or critical information that you need to protect, and or you need to be up and running again to be able to supply to the public. It's tough call either way.
Mario, your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, it really depends, and a lot of it, is pretty much, I agree with what Brian just said. I mean, if you don't pay it, is either you or your clients, out of business? Like, is it like lethal if you don't pay it? If you did you, but in some cases, if you took the proper precautions and it still happened, did you? Are you just, or your clients, are they just down for a week or two until you recover and do, go from a backup or something like that? In a situation like that, I definitely don't think they should pay, but if they don't have anything, if they don't have backups, they haven't been, you know, cautious about what they need to do when it comes to cybersecurity, then you have no choice but to pay it, or depending also on how I actually talked to somebody, I think it was like a year ago, and I was telling them, I'm like, listen, we don't do any security for you. We don't do any of this stuff. I think we were only providing them like break fix work, and it was a medical facility, and I'm like, we need, I need to know, are you going to plan on doing this stuff? Like the doctor said, he's retiring in like a year or two. If it happens, he'll just retire early.
Ooh,
I'm
yikes.
like,
Yeah.
okay, that's your plan, that's your exit plan. I'm like, all right, that's fine, but you have to do more than just like the bare minimum.
Yeah, so I've got a couple thoughts on the pay the ransom versus not pay the ransom. And early retirement's not a great strategy. I'm just going to throw that out there.
No.
I'm not a fan of that. But I had two thoughts as I was kind of chewing this one. Which route do you go? And forget about everything leading up to it for a minute. Like, you're in the situation for whatever reason, negligence or no, you're in the situation and you've been ransomed. And it's kind of like, are you guys South Park fans by chance?
A little bit.
Do you remember the episode of the turd sandwich versus the giant douche? They're voting for it's a whole thing is a spoof, obviously, on politics, but they're voting for the school mascot. And point being, there's no good answer. There's not a good answer to this. But let's frame this for a second on, if it was your child. Now that answer becomes really easy. You do everything. You do everything to try to ensure a good outcome, regardless of what led up to it. So I might lean that way if you find yourself in the situation and that's what you have to do to protect your clients. I mean, you've got to take that seriously. You really do. All other things aside, you are a steward for your client's information. You put their, not only right now, but potentially for the rest of their lives, their identity, their security, their safety at risk. So this is not professional advice. This is me just musing. I might find myself inclined to pay if that seemed like the best way to ensure a good outcome.
Yeah. Everybody has a lot to say until it happens to them.
So. Exactly. Yeah. That's probably a better way to put it than what I'm saying. But yeah. It's easy to sit here and say, oh, if I was in this $5 million lawsuit, I would. And by the way, I would have never got there because I do everything right in the first place.
That doesn't happen.
And that's why I keep saying 97%, because you can do everything right and it doesn't matter.
Still get breached.
Can still find yourself in that situation. So, okay. So how do we make this happen to somebody else? That's the question I like to ask when I'm looking at all of these things. Thoughts, Brian? You got a thought on that one?
Well, I do, Justin, and it's going to be probably the same thing I say most weeks, and that is cybersecurity should be like a journey. And our good buddy Joseph, by the way, from the video, said the same thing. Do something, right? You don't have to do it all at once. We're not saying go ahead and take out $1 million out of your bank account and start putting in cybersecurity protections. What we're saying is go after the low-hanging fruit first, right? Take a look at, get a gap analysis or a risk assessment done. Take a look at what are the most obvious things you need to do and start implementing one at a time as quickly as you can, as much as you can afford, in the order of priority that the gap or risk assessment comes out with. And if you do those things and you get breached in the meantime, at least then when they're looking at a lawsuit, it's like, okay, you didn't have your head in the sand. You tried. You
Right.
tried to do what you could with the resources you had in hand. And so I like to say, treat cybersecurity like a journey. I used to say everybody has to have my this package in order for us to work with them, and now we've created like a sort of in between, like a lower end package where we say, okay, this is at least all the things that we believe you should have in place that are affordable. If you can, then go to the next package up, and so on and so forth, and we'll apply different protections in place as we go along. But just start somewhere, anywhere.
Document that process. We learned that
Correct.
from Joe as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Have that
Document.
process documented.
Yeah.
Mario, thoughts on this one? How do you make this happen to somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, it's again adding on to Bryan. It's I recommend the first step is educate yourself, educate your employees. If the employer or I'm sorry, the employee knows, like, I'm not doing ACH authorization just based on an email that came in, or I'm not switching somebody's direct deposit information just based on an email. I have a process for this. They have to come to my office, they have to fill out a form and stuff like that, or they have to call me. All of a sudden, if you remember last week's conversation, those two prospects that I spoke to, they lost hundreds of thousands of dollars because they didn't have proper education, proper procedures. They just thought the email was legit and they wired hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you just educate and say, you know what, from now on, we will never do this, you're more than halfway there.
Right.
Education, that's key.
Okay. And then the sad ending of the story is if you don't do that on your own, if we don't go through this process and have it documented and constantly be improving and vigilant, we don't want to find ourselves being talked about by somebody else on a podcast of, hey, what should Justin, Mario, and Bryan have been doing? Because now we're under litigation and court-ordered security measures, by the way. The court's going to come in and say, okay, for you to stay in business, you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z. And you're going to have to spend that money that you thought you couldn't afford. Guess what? I bet right now you can. So
that's right now you can't afford not to.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay. So there's nothing really new in discussing this as far as what we recommend, right? It's still kind of the same thing that we talk about week after week. But what was new that caught my attention really is that the lawsuit specifically stated they should have paid the ransom. That definitely caught my eyes. Yeah. So, but it comes back to the title of the podcast. This stuff's preventable. Put your best practices, your industry standards in place. Audit yourself regularly, and if you don't have, you've got to have somebody helping you with this, and use us if you want to. Use your own internal team if that's what you've got. Use your outsourced IT company, but hold them accountable with some sort of a framework.
Yeah.
Right? Whether that, I highly advocate for something like NIST or an actual framework like that. But there's so many other ways you can get that information. I mean, you can just Google cybersecurity protection best practices, and you're going to come up with a list of things. Do something, like Bryan said. Do something to make sure that whoever you trust to do this for you is being held accountable by somebody else. That would be my best recommendation. All right, guys, any other final thoughts or takeaways as far as this particular topic goes? Otherwise, we're going to move on to our security tip of the week.
I think that wraps it up for me.
Okay. All right.
Straightforward.
So it's, as we talk about these best practices and industry standard and all that nonsense, I like that we kind of include on a weekly basis of here's one that we can break down. And I'm just going to, this is a spoiler alert. The solution here is cybersecurity awareness training. The question is, how do we spot a phishing email? So again, we've already said the answer. We beat that dead horse nonstop, but let's put that aside for a second and let's talk about some of the things you might learn in one of these security training courses on spotting a phishing email. Mario, I'm going to put you on the spot first. What would you tell somebody as if you're training a class of people, you're standing at the front of the class, you've got your best prospects or your best clients in front of you. How are you going to tell them to not fall victim to a phishing email?
So one of the things that I tell my existing clients, and I have people on a regular basis, they'll forward something to me and say, is this legit or not? One of the easiest things to do is, if there's a button that says like click here to do this, to log in, if you hover your mouse over that button, on the very bottom of your browser, on the bottom, most likely it's on the bottom left with Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge, it will show you the link of where that button goes to. Okay, so before you don't even need to click anything. You just put your mouse over it. And if you see that it's not taking you to Microsoft.com or, whatever it is, if it's directing you to a random other website, right away, that's just one of the ways that you will know that that's phishing.
Okay. Brian, thoughts?
I'm a big fan of the SLAM methodology. So that is looking at, and I use SLAM because it's an acronym. The S is for sender. So look at the sender. Who's sending you the message? If it's coming from Gmail, or something that doesn't look like it's right, just ignore it, move on, delete it. L is links, so that's what Mario was talking about. Hover your mouse over the links, work your way from the farthest end, so the end of the domain name, so .com, for example, or .org, and work your way forward. If it's .com, .xyz, then it's, if it's Microsoft.com.xyz, then that's not really Microsoft's website, because we work our way backwards, and I can explain more of that later. A is attachments. And take a look at the attachments. If the attachment if it looks suspicious, don't open it. But if it looks suspicious, like invoice.pdf.xml, like that's not an invoice. It's not a PDF. It's actually a file that could harm you. And the last one is message. So look at the message itself. Now this one's becoming a little less important because of AI, and now criminals are able to generate a ton of messages that actually look like it's proper English, but a lot of the criminals out there are still terrible at using English, and so you'll usually spot some errors in English. So reading the message oftentimes will help too. So those 4 things will go a long way towards helping you spot a phishing attempt.
Okay, I'm going to throw my 2 cents at that SLAM method because I love that.